The tension between Jon Jones and Daniel Cormier wasn't just another UFC rivalry, it was personal. The kind of personal that seeps into every word, every stare, every exchange in the octagon. From the moment they first locked eyes, it was clear this wasn't just about championship gold. It was about pride, legacy, and a deep-rooted disdain that neither man ever truly masked. When their names were mentioned in the same breath, fight fans knew they weren't just getting a bout. They were witnessing a war that could only end in dominance or devastation. Jon Jones, a fighter so gifted that his talent alone made him seem untouchable, stood as the most dangerous man to ever step into the light heavyweight division. His reach, creativity, and unpredictability made him a nightmare matchup for anyone who dared to challenge him. But it wasn't just his skill set that set him apart, it was his aura. The feeling that, no matter how great his opponents were, he had something they didn't. A mind for the fight that worked like a machine, calculating angles, adjusting to pressure, and breaking men down with a ruthless efficiency. Yet, beneath all of that talent, there was something else, something that made his rivalry with Daniel Cormier so volatile. A fire that burned just as bright as his brilliance. A need to prove that he wasn't just better inside the cage, but outside of it too. Daniel Cormier, on the other hand, was the epitome of resilience. A man who had endured the kind of struggles that could break lesser men. A former Olympic wrestler, a heavyweight who cut down to light heavyweight just for the chance to chase greatness, and a fighter whose willpower was as unshakable as the granite fists he carried. Cormier had never been the longest, the fastest, or the flashiest. But he was, without question, one of the toughest. His wrestling was suffocating, his pressure relentless, and his hunger undeniable. He wasn't fighting for attention or validation. He was fighting because deep down, he believed he was the best. And the only way to prove it was by beating the man standing in his way. The first time they met inside the octagon, the animosity was already boiling over. It started with words, heated exchanges, interviews dripping with venom, press conferences that felt more like battlegrounds than promotional events. Jones played the role of the smug, untouchable king, while Cormier carried himself like a man who had been underestimated for too long. They came face to face, shoving, shouting, nearly coming to blows before the fight had even begun. Fans weren't just waiting for a fight, they were waiting for an explosion. And when the cage door finally shut, the world watched as their hatred turned into violence. But it wasn't just a brawl. It was chess at the highest level, a battle of minds as much as it was a war of bodies. Jones, the master of range and control, used his reach, his elbows, his ability to make adjustments mid-fight. Cormier, the relentless grinder, pushed forward with pressure, trying to close the distance, trying to drag Jones into deep waters, where technique and reach mattered less than sheer will. For 5 brutal rounds, they fought like men who had no intention of leaving the rivalry unresolved. And when it was over, only one hand was raised. For Daniel Cormier, the loss cut deeper than any wound. It wasn't just a defeat. It was a reminder that, no matter how much work he put in, no matter how much he had sacrificed, Jon Jones still had his number. And Jones knew it. His confidence only grew, his words cutting even deeper in the aftermath. But fate has a way of keeping things unsettled, and for these two, one fight was never going to be enough. A rematch was inevitable. The world demanded it. The UFC needed it. And for Cormier, there was no other fight that mattered. He trained harder, refined his skills, obsessed over every mistake he had made in their first encounter. He told himself that this time would be different, that he would not only fight Jones again, but he would beat him. And as the fight approached, the emotions reached a fever pitch. The press conferences were more explosive, the trash talk more vicious, and the animosity between them felt almost unbearable. Jon Jones, ever the enigma, carried himself with the same icy confidence. He had beaten Cormier once, and in his mind, he would do it again. But this time, the stakes were higher. This time, there was more than a belt on the line. It was about finality, about proving, once and for all, who the better man truly was. And as the two stood across from each other once more, with the arena roaring, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife, one question lingered in the air: would Daniel Cormier finally conquer his greatest rival? Or was Jon Jones destined to be the one mountain he could never climb? The cage door locked. The referee stepped forward. And as the first round was about to begin, the world held its breath, waiting to witness the next chapter in one of the most intense rivalries in UFC history. The opening moments of the fight were like a high-stakes game of deception, both men feinting, reading, testing. Jon Jones circled with his signature fluidity, his long limbs already setting the rhythm, while Daniel Cormier stayed compact, his hands up, his posture coiled like a spring ready to explode forward. The crowd roared at every movement, every step, knowing that one mistake could shift the entire battle. But this wasn't just a fight. It was years of bitterness unleashed in a cage, and neither man was willing to take the first real risk without knowing exactly what the other had planned. Then, without warning, Jones struck first, a lightning-fast oblique kick aimed at Cormier's lead leg. It landed with precision, forcing Cormier to adjust. Another kick followed, and another. This was the way Jones fought, breaking his opponent down piece by piece, never letting them find their rhythm. But Cormier had prepared for this. He stepped through the kicks, absorbing the sting, and lunged in, forcing a clinch. His hands locked around Jones' waist, and for a split second, the fight shifted. Cormier's wrestling was his greatest weapon, and he used it like a hammer. He drove Jones back against the fence, his grip tightening as he worked for control. But Jones, ever the tactician, adapted instantly. He dug an underhook, leaned his frame into Cormier, and began fighting to turn the position. The battle in the clinch was a war within a war. Cormier using raw strength and technique, Jones countering with leverage and brutal elbows in close range. Each strike that landed was a reminder that neither man had any intention of leaving without taking a piece of the other with them. Then came the first real shift. As they broke from the clinch, Jones threw a spinning back elbow that barely missed, but it forced Cormier to hesitate for just a fraction of a second. And that was all Jones needed. He stepped in, flicked out a jab, and then sent a vicious high kick screaming toward Cormier's temple. It landed clean. The crowd erupted as Cormier stumbled, his legs faltering for the briefest of moments. But just as it seemed like Jones had his opening, something unexpected happened. Instead of backing away to recover, Cormier surged forward, grabbing Jones in a desperate clinch before driving him to the mat with sheer force. The arena gasped as Jones, for one of the rare moments in his career, found himself looking up at the lights. Cormier wasted no time. He rained down punches, his fists hammering against Jones' defenses, his years of frustration and pain channeled into every strike. It was a position many had never seen Jones in before, a moment that felt like a fracture in his aura of invincibility. Jones, however, was not a man who panicked. He twisted, slid his hips, and began working his way back to his feet, but Cormier wasn't letting go. He clung to Jones like a man possessed, his grip tightening as he pulled him back down. The seconds dragged on, and for the first time, it looked like the fight might be slipping from Jones' control. But then, just when it seemed like Cormier was about to take complete command, Jones pulled a trick from his arsenal that no one expected. With a sudden explosion of movement, he rolled, using Cormier's own pressure against him, and in an instant, he was the one on top. The energy in the arena flipped, the momentum of the fight shifting once again. Jones wasted no time. His elbows came crashing down, sharp, deliberate, punishing. Each one landed with the kind of precision that had made him feared. But Cormier, bloodied but unbroken, still refused to back down. He bucked, twisted, trying to create space, trying to do anything to avoid the inevitable. And then, in a move that stunned the audience, Jones did something no one expected. He stepped back. He let Cormier rise. He waved him up. The look in his eyes wasn't one of mercy. It was a challenge. He wanted more. He wanted to prove that he could beat Cormier not just on the ground, but in every way imaginable. Cormier, breathing heavily but still burning with defiance, wiped the blood from his face and nodded. He wasn't done yet. As the next round loomed, neither man looked willing to break. The fight had already taken unexpected turns, and the night was far from over. But one thing was certain: when the final bell rang, one of them would leave with more than just a victory. They would leave knowing, without question, that they had faced their greatest rival and given everything they had left to settle the score. The moment the next round began, everything slowed for a breath, a second where the entire world seemed to hold still, waiting for the inevitable explosion. Daniel Cormier, battered but unrelenting, surged forward first, refusing to let Jon Jones dictate the pace. His hands snapped out in sharp bursts, his footwork aggressive as he cut off the cage, trying to force Jones into an exchange he couldn't escape. But Jones, always calculating, stayed just out of reach, his eyes locked onto Cormier with a focus that spoke volumes. He had let him rise for a reason. Now, he was about to show why. Then it came. A feint, a subtle shift in weight, and Jones fired another high kick, aiming for the same spot where he had rocked Cormier earlier. But this time, Cormier was ready. He ducked, rolled under the kick, and came up swinging a looping right hand that caught Jones just enough to throw him off balance. The crowd roared as Cormier pressed in, body shots landing with a dull thud, forcing Jones to retreat. For the first time in the fight, Jones looked like he had to think about his next move rather than dictate it. Cormier saw his moment. He shot in for a takedown, arms wrapping around Jones's waist with the kind of strength that had made him a two-division champion. But just as he drove forward, just as he felt the fight shifting in his favor, Jones did something that left the entire arena in shock. Instead of fighting the takedown, he went with it, rolling midair and landing in a position that no one had ever seen before. It wasn't just a counter. It was something out of a different dimension. Cormier's grip loosened for half a second, but that was all Jones needed. He exploded upward, reversing the position in one fluid motion. Now, he was on top, his elbows already rising. 1, 2, 3, each one crashing down with ruthless precision. Cormier struggled, trying to shift, but Jones's weight was perfectly placed, his control suffocating. The punches kept coming, a relentless barrage that forced the referee to step in. The fight was over. Jones stood, arms raised, the victory his once again. But even in triumph, something different lingered in his expression. This wasn't just another win. This was a statement, a final word in a rivalry that had defined both men. He turned to look at Cormier, still on the mat, exhausted, beaten but not broken. Even in defeat, Cormier refused to let this moment define him. He sat up, breathing hard, shaking his head, but then he did something unexpected. He reached out. Jones hesitated for a fraction of a second, then stepped forward and took his hand. For the first time in years, the hostility seemed to fade. There was no trash talk, no post-fight venom, just two warriors who had given everything they had to settle something bigger than just a title fight. The audience, once roaring with divided chants, now stood in unified applause. Because no matter what had come before, they had just witnessed something unforgettable. As Jones walked away, belt draped over his shoulder, and Cormier rose to his feet, still standing despite everything, the rivalry that had once seemed endless now felt like it had finally found its resolution. And yet, even as the cameras faded, one question remained unspoken. Had this really been the last time these two would ever stand across from each other? Or was fate waiting for the perfect moment to bring them together once more?